So now I'd like to welcome the team one by one who've been leading much of the work on this. First of all, I'd like to welcome Josefina Lindblom of DG Environment to present a little bit the start of this journey and what it means, what this new policy is that they've been working on at the Commission. Josefina.
So, as we just heard, this sector is one of the most resource-consuming ones that we have. Different figures come up in different places, but this is something that we normally see. About half of our extracted materials go into our built environment, half of the energy consumption, about a third of our water consumption, and as much as a third of our total generated waste stems from this sector. So the overall aim of this part of the communication then is to promote a more efficient use of resources in the construction and renovation of commercial, public and residential buildings. But it's also, I want to stress, it's also to reduce the overall environmental impact throughout the life cycle of buildings. So it's obviously not just to cut down on the resource consumption, but it's really linked to the environmental impact that this gives rise to. That's the important part in a sense. And as was already stressed in the welcoming speech, it's the life cycle that we're interested in. So to look at all the different life cycle stages, which makes sense. So what are the barriers to this? Why isn't this happening by itself in a sense? Well, we've had a lot of discussions with different kinds of stakeholders in the last couple of years. We also had a public consultation last year, of course. And some of the most typical comments that we have heard is that, well, there's no common European understanding and dialogue about green buildings. We don't have any kind of definition. Many people, when they talk about green buildings, they really mean energy efficient buildings. Another typical comment is that market needs to better and more widely understand the environmental pillar of sustainability as opposed to maybe the economic and the social pillars. There are existing schemes, of course, for the certification of green buildings. We all know that, but they are different in many ways, and they are difficult to compare. Hence, it's difficult to build up a critical mass of data to make business case, and that is the fourth comment here, that it's difficult to convince stakeholders about the business case and the necessity of reducing environmental impacts because there's simply not enough data to put forward. All this, in one way or the other, it's really linked to the lack of data, so reliable and transparent and the key word may be comparable data to move the mainstream market. I mean, we already see, of course, the top end of the market. There's a pull there, but for the mainstream market, we don't see enough things, we think, going on. So we conclude that there is this lack of data, methods and tools to provide this data. And if that is the case, there's also an absence of guidance on how to incorporate those kinds of considerations in purchasing decisions. So the objective of this communication, and obviously the implementation work that is to follow, is that we want to influence decision-making along the life cycle, so both supply and demand side, by providing relevant and comparable information regarding the full environmental performance of a building. And that's where we come into, or that's where we have concluded that we need this assessment framework, which we will be talking about for a big part of the day. An assessment framework with core indicators, which could, in a sense, provide, we hope, a common language. The question is, of course, how will that differ to already existing initiatives, and why is it important that we do this now? But this is something that we will come back to again and again during the day. What are comments that we get on this idea, so to say? Well, it is very many stakeholders believe it's the right time to focus on impacts of the environmental performance of buildings, so going beyond energy efficiency. We see how many initiatives are being done to improve the energy efficiency of buildings, And as that is happening, it's very important to keep in our minds that we should minimize, or we shouldn't have at all actually, burden shifting. We should be aware of other kinds of environmental impacts as we are targeting energy efficiency. We should encourage better design, because that's where it starts, of course, better project planning, more resource-efficient construction products, as well as construction and renovation. We really need to have something which works for renovation as well, because that's where most of the activity is ongoing. The priority must be core indicators. We don't intend to come up with a framework with 20, 30 indicators. We already have those kinds of schemes in a sense, but it's really about a limited number of indicators, which should be focusing on impacts that stakeholders really have an intuitive feeling for, so that is understandable by at least most of stakeholders. Again, as was mentioned on a previous slide, it is about providing a simple framework that would encourage the mainstream market. This is what we're really targeting here, the mainstream market, to move towards better practice. So the features that this framework should have, we believe, after having consulted intensively and done a bit of thinking ourselves as well, obviously, is that it should be flexible. So that means that we should be able to integrate it in existing assessment schemes, which already are out there. They could then use it as a module in their schemes next to their scheme-specific sets of indicators. But that would at least make them comparable on those indicators, so to say. But it should also be possible to use this framework with their core indicators on their own, so that you don't necessarily have to do a certification, which is very costly, where you probably look at 20, 30, 40 indicators, but you could only use these and still have a reasonable good grip of what your building, how your building is performing. It should be simple, provide limited and hopefully easily understandable but comparable, relevant data. Very importantly, and I think we will be discussing that a lot today, how this should translate into, how technical indicators should translate into information which is relevant to the financial part of this sector, because it's really all about demand in the end. Free to use, I mean, I understand that it's not totally free to assess a building according to any kind of indicators, but what I'm saying is, as it is the Commission who is developing it together with stakeholders, it will of course be free to use once it's there. Today we have made an assessment, or we have assessed that less than 1% of our buildings are assessed for their environmental performance, so beyond energy then. And we really need something which can pick up this number. And we hope, of course, eventually to also reach into the residential market, where the big bulk of our buildings are. It may not be the first part of the market where this will be picked up, if successful, but we hope to get there eventually as well. Am I right to say that I leave the stage to you then? Yeah? All right.
Okay. Josefina was the good cop, now it's the bad cop talking. Not because I'm from DG Enterprise, but now we come to the part where it comes to the work, actually. So far it was the background work that somebody already has done. Now it's the work that we have to do, that means practically Commission. And to a certain extent, we intend to include you in this work. Mostly because we don't have the expertise exactly in this demand side field. We are talking mostly to actually the supply side, which means manufacturers, architects, civil engineers, and the scheme providers. So now a little bit more, what are we expecting from today's meeting and from the ongoing work and cooperation? First of all, as it was already said, we are talking here about a common language. So it should not be something that only a handful of experts can actually discuss in Europe, and everybody else has just to say, okay, it's gold, silver, bronze, it's level A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, or whatever, and nobody has the slightest clue what this is about. Because there's a certain risk then in the end that the schemes that we have in place are not the ones that are actually helping, or they have clear targets in mind, it's just they look good. And this is not what we want to achieve with this long exercise. So What we want to do is, in particular in this scheme, to get something that allows the exchange of experience, the exchange of knowledge, for the demand side, also for the engineers who are doing the design work. With different schemes in place, it's extremely difficult in the end to identify, okay, is this a good idea or not, or could I learn from another experience if this system or this building has been assessed in a complete different system. So the important thing is, if we create the common language that Josefina has talked before, we can actually use systems in more than just one country. We can also use the information. The information can be distributed between the people who have to use it in design, but also the ones who have then to assess, is this now an improvement of the building performance or not? And last not least, it's for the policymakers. If the systems are not comparable, then it's a little bit difficult to have then policies in different member states that are comparable and that are in the end not creating barriers to trade. Because in the end, it's not the point that we are, as a Commission, dealing with the things when everything is already too late and the systems are written in stone and you can't change them anyway again. That's just an invitation for failure. How do we plan to do this? I mean, it's not something that can be solved today. It's not something that can be solved till Christmas. We have started before the summer holidays, actually after the publication of the communication, to address different stakeholder groups, to talk to different groups, to see, okay, what does this sustainability and resource efficiency actually mean? What are your targets? What are your ideas? Why are you doing this, for heaven's sake? No? And therefore, actually, this whole timeline to create, on one hand, to talk to everybody, to create consensus, and then finally have a system in place that could actually, as Josefina mentioned, all these relevant points included, that takes some time. So we are estimating 2-3 years. It might even be optimistic, but I think we can manage something at least we set the cornerstones and we have something that is operational. It will never be completely finished. It will go on and will be more precise, but the basis should be there. It's also a top-down and a bottom-up approach. The top-down approach, because practically we as a Commission, we are not interested in a label in a single building. This is nice, fine, but it's not a matter for the European Commission. For us, it's more important, what are the macro objectives? What are the goals here? What do I want to achieve? Do I want to reduce waste? Do I want to reduce the amount of natural resources that I use? Do I want to reduce the dependency on energy imports? These are the targets for us, so they have to be there, and therefore the schemes have to answer to these demands. Have they done this or not? This is the exercise that we are doing right now. On the other hand, it's nice to have beautiful global goals and they don't work in practice. So this is the bottom-up approach here. So you have to look actually also, can the indicators work? Is the data available? So in the end, have we something in our hands that can actually support these policies? And of course, as Josefina already said, we are not trying to invent the wheel again. This is not a parallel structure to everything that is here. It's a framework where all the systems should at least find their common ground in the end. We are not creating a parallel system because neither have we the resources nor the knowledge actually to catch up with years and decades of experience in this field. This is still for the markets to use tools, to improve the tools, to look into them. But it's important to have a core that is comparable, that allows this exchange of information that I was talking before. And of course, we can't do it ourselves. This is something we can provide our input, and the input of the Commission is mostly our abilities to get stakeholders from different levels together, to help a little bit the translation process, not actually in the languages automatically, but more to understand what are the different stakeholders talking about. These are our strong points. But the technical input and also the practical input, why are certain things are done, this is coming from you. This is where we need you. You are the experts here. We are coordinating. In a certain way, we are doing James' work in a slightly different field. I mentioned already the macro objectives, so I don't want to go too deep into this. What is important is the second bullet point. We are not doing this just as bureaucrats and working here practically on political ideas, and that's it. There's also, of course, a support that is coming on one hand from the experts like you, but also the Joint Research Center is following this work and is committing their resources also to the background, to the scientific background here. So again, we are not trying just to find a nice political solution within 2-3 years and then say, okay, fine, it's done. It has to have a solid basis, actually, that the system as such can be used and can survive the next years with all the changes that might come. I would not go then in detail to the indicators or for time restraints, but the important thing here is for the indicators to consider we are not inventing new indicators. That's not the point. As it was already said before, a lot of the data is here, a lot of the indicators are here. The important thing is to identify the right ones that are following on one hand these macro objectives and on the other hand providing, as Josefina said, indicators that you can understand, that you can live with, and you can say, okay, I get this information and I can work with it. I get an idea what they are trying to tell me here. We are talking to stakeholders. We are not doing this in huge conferences. This is a workshop, so this is exactly the working profile that we have in mind. We want to have feedback. We don't want to stand here and just tell you how brilliant we are and what marvelous idea we have and we are saving the world in the next 2-3 years as planned. It's more the point having smaller groups. We are working with experts who can actually contribute here. So the general idea is also we are not interested in a political position or defending what is already there. It's much more to have people here who are open-minded and can actually contribute in providing new ideas, crossing the borders between different sectors, which are to a certain extent not even talking to each other for the time being. So the stakeholder consultation is starting with small groups. When we have found a consensus, when we have something that is more solid, then we widen the scope and then we bring the different groups together. Now to your work, actually. Now it's the part where your expertise comes into play. We have been talking, as I said before, mostly to the architects, to the civil engineers, to the manufacturers. They have strong representations here in Brussels. They are also very loud and they are dominating standardization. So practically these are our usual suspects. But then there is a problem. Then they tell us, yeah, we have to do certain things because the market demands it. And then you have to ask a question, is it really that the market demands exactly what they are telling us right now, or is it what they want to tell the market right now, which is a completely different issue here. And we have, to a certain extent, the demand side, not a complete blind spot, but a relatively blind spot. It's important for us to balance a little bit the view so that we are not just driven by one side who have a certain interest, and one of the interests is selling certificates. It's also, what do you get out of this? What is your added value? What do you see as an added value here? What can you take out of this here? And we are starting today. We are starting today practically with experiences, with ideas to start the ball running. And one of the things is that we get your recommendations. What is important when we go for this exercise of having this framework here? What is the important information that you want to see? Why do you want to see it? And is something already there? Or is there something that we really have to start from scratch and to develop the instruments to provide that kind of information? It's not a complete wish list. We are close to Christmas, but we are not actually adding everything that we would like to see. But the important thing is, what do you really want to get out of a framework like sustainable buildings? It was already mentioned, one of the main problems is the data collection, data flow. What do you get from scheme providers? How much can you work with this? This is a very important thing. What is your practical experience in this field? How can we actually help here or not? This is not automatically something that you can easily answer, but we've given us your ideas, your recommendations, and this is what we would like to know, then we can check, okay, what are our possibilities actually to fulfill these demands. And last not least, it's not just the systems are there and we would like to see more sustainable or green buildings or whatever, or energy efficient buildings. No? There has to be also, let's say, not the push factor in the way of a law or a policy as such. There has to be also something that makes it interesting to have this. So what is the added value in this of the certificate? And here we are also looking in how can we as a commission convince or make this more attractive to follow the principle of sustainable buildings. What can we, with your experience as the final users of this whole exercise, how can we promote this? How can we present this in a way that is easy understandable and attractive enough? So practically today, is this really everything? Yeah. Today, we are looking for your technical expertise, your expectation. Feel free to say everything. Feel free to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. There are only stupid answers, and we try to avoid them, at least for today. So be as open as possible. This is not the one and only chance. I mean, we might come back to in different ways to you, but it is one of the most important chances to bring your input in there and actually to say, okay, we have got a lot of information, we got certificates, we got a lot of different elements in place, but the important thing is right now, why do you want it, what do you see as an added value, and what can we do to help you to get this idea of sustainable and green buildings more promoted and more taken up at the different levels. Thank you.